Welcome to today's panel session on building the business case and securing funds during the pandemic. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Solomon Adote and Dan Lawman. And today we're going to talk about some of the top areas where you can seek funding from federal government to be able to support some of those key projects within the business. To kick us off on this conversation, Dan, I'm going to bring you in if that's okay. And I know that in your experience, there's been certainly mixed experience across state government around their success in securing funding. So I wonder if you could help maybe start us off by talking about maybe some of the areas where funding would be available to those on the line that might be listening today.
Great. Thank you so much, Tony. It's great to be with you and Solomon on this important topic. You know, I was a former chief security officer, chief technology officer, and the chief information officer of one of the agencies in Michigan. So over 17 years, this topic was really front and foremost for me. And now with the CARES Act, you know, it's just top of the mind for state governments, for local governments. You know, some of the areas are listed right here. You can read the bullets, you know, whether it be election security, police, law enforcement. I know back in after 9/11, you know, 15 years ago, we got a lot of money in Michigan, over $6 million for cybersecurity from the different grants related to Homeland Security grants for cybersecurity. CGIS has grants, transportation and unemployment. These are all topics that are by stovepipes in your individual agencies within government that really kind of transcend time, that there are grants that are out there kind of ongoing in an ongoing manner. Of course, more recently, the CARES Act Fund. In a current pandemic, the situation we're in across the nation, there's really a very mixed picture, I think, with different people experiencing the ability to work with their agencies and especially the CARES Act organizations that control the funds. But I know a number of states have done very, very well. I won't call out any specific ones, but I know Maine's done well. A few others have done very well. Solomon's going to talk about Delaware in a few moments. But certainly, CARES Act funding includes the work from home, the issues around communication. There's been a lot of issues with the pandemic that state governments and local governments have faced. So there's also quite a bit of potential with these links we show here around future grants. I know the House passed some funding for cybersecurity grants. There's some debate as to whether that's going to actually pass this year before the election, and or maybe during the lame duck session in November, December, or would it kick out to the next Congress in 2021? But certainly there's a lot of talk, and NASA's done a lot of great work in this area related to the grants offered by CISA and Department of Homeland Security. So those are just a few of the different pots of money that are available to states. And I certainly encourage you, I'm going to give some more specific details at the end, to visit those links to learn more.
Thanks, Dan. That's a great start. And I know towards the end of this conversation, you're going to give us some of your tips on how people listening to this particular session can maybe learn a little bit more about that. Solomon, I'm going to bring you in at this point, if that's now okay. And actually, the reason why I think this will be really interesting for those listening is COVID-19 has turned our worlds upside down. And it's not the first time in history that an event has driven change. But certainly, I think everyone would agree that it probably is the first time that something has happened so fast, and also something that's happened that's affected every single organization on the planet. So one of the things that we see as a result of that is often a drive in innovation and a drive to change. And I think what we all recognize is that COVID-19 has changed our environment now. And one of probably the biggest impacts that everyone will feel at a personal level is just the change in remote working. And one of the things I'm really keen to get your thoughts on is when we look at this space, there are certain applications that have had a dramatic impact on usage in that remote working universe. And I think probably one of the most obvious ones is email traffic. And what I'm first of all interested to get your thoughts are on, within, just like every other state, have you also seen a rapid increase in just the sheer volume of content now that is shared via email, simply because some of those more traditional channels like post are simply not available, so more content is shared via email? So we've seen a massive spike in traffic. Have you also seen that same spike?
Yes, I have, and it's wonderful to be here with you, Dan and Tony. And Dan, it's going to be a whole year we won't get to see you, so we're all going through withdrawal here in the state of Delaware. But we miss you, and we hope to see you again soon. To speak on the topic of the pandemic for the state of Delaware, uh, it was very clear that we were not ready. We were not ready for the number of people that had to go home and work from home, and the type of people that actually had to go home and work from home. There were certain job classifications that usually are on premise within the network. Data communications is via, you could call it file shares or technologies like that. So the need to actually transfer information was actually very limited. It was more of, you could go to the share and pick it up. But now data had to be transferred. And the type of data that had to be transferred even had higher sensitivity. There were entities in the state of Delaware that probably in state government and outside state government that didn't have a need to send this type of data. But now we're collaborating with pharmaceutical companies or pharmacists. We're collaborating with small businesses to help us with COVID response. We're collaborating with universities for research on COVID. So there's a lot of sensitive data that we have to transfer. And as most organizations would admit when they look at the data, is that it's not always done well. The challenges we noticed was the attention to detail was different from when people were in office. When they sat down behind their desk, they had a formal working environment, they had a coffee next to them, and they behaved in a particular way. When you're home assisting your kids with their homework and rushing back for their conference call, that attention to detail was a bit less. And we saw the incidence of very sensitive information ended up in the wrong hands, where you're putting together your send to list, you're typing away, and you forgot that your brother-in-law is also called Tony, and then you pick that brother-in-law, and now he has medical information of a constituent that was never intended for that purpose. The other thing that we also had to respond to was the elections. We've always provided absentee ballots for our citizens, but this year we had unprecedented numbers. We're talking about 10 times or more than 20 times what we've ever had in terms of absentee voting. And we provide multiple avenues to submit the ballots. But the most secure was through mail, the ability to encrypt the file and send the file through mail, and to have a type of technology that provides our users with an easy registration and easy use was very important to us. And that is the world we're living in right now, where we have to adapt and mitigate some of these risks.
You know what, Solomon, you've touched on some fascinating elements there, and I want to just unpick a few because I know everyone listening on the line will be able to relate to this. The first I want to unpick a little bit more detail is what you said about, that we're in a familiar environment at home, right? Well, one would hope it is your home, but it's not necessarily a familiar working environment. And I think you touched on something there which I was really interested in about those distractions. We did some research in this area, and we found that 37% of the breaches of security by email were people because they were tired and they were stressed and they were distracted. And actually, what was also interesting in that's increased twice-fold because of remote working. So everything you said there just reinforces the fact that not only is more data being transferred electronically and digitally, and email is such an easy way of doing it, but you've touched on that piece that people are only human and they do make mistakes. And whether it's that example you mentioned about Outlook autocomplete, sending it to the wrong Tony, we're seeing that as an error, but it's not a malicious insider, right, Solomon? And there's a lot of time, and I know you're a thought leader in this insider threat space, where there's a lot of attention that's being placed on the malicious insider, so the individual that's purposefully and knowingly bringing harm to your organization. What you're describing there isn't a malicious insider. It is a well-intentioned employee that is working hard but has distractions at home, and they are making genuine mistakes because of a completely new working environment. And I think that's something that isn't often talked about, Solomon. Would you agree with that?
I completely would agree. And they're trying to add value. We have organizations that are trying to generate data in real time that is affecting policies from the governor's office, that is affecting citizen lives. They just want to get that data out, and they want to get it out really with an attention to security themselves. It's like, I want to use the mail system. I don't want to send it through any other means. And they're doing the right things, but that inability to be alerted to those opportunities, that inability to be alerted that, hey, there's this type of content in your mail. Do you really want to send it to this audience or to that person? A lot of our technologies don't come with that built in. It was things that we had to add to make that possible.
I think it's one of those situations. Too many people, and I know, Solomon, you've been giving talks on this for some time now, and we've really enjoyed working with you and to help present some of these kind of ways of tackling the problem. People often think, hey, people will always make mistakes. There's not a lot we can do about that. But actually, with the advances in technology, especially with the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence now, that really gives state government the ability to enable organizations to offer a safety net to prevent this from happening. This isn't hocus pocus technology. This is very real technology that can be delivered to prevent these type of things from happening, right, Solomon?
Absolutely. And it's about just providing an awareness. It's just about an alert. It's just about a caution. You don't have to be an impediment in their way of working. I highlight to my team all the time that user experience is critical to cybersecurity. Most don't relate the two, because if you make it so difficult to send a file, they'll put it on a USB stick and mail it. If you make it so difficult, they will send it via their personal email. The idea is to make it convenient while still providing the guardrails to protect them. And that is what is critical, the guardrails to protect them.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's two elements to this email security landscape. You're absolutely right. Probably the most important is make sure that we can put those guardrails in that can stop people making a mistake. And I think the second, and this is something Delaware's been doing for many, many years, is have a mechanism to be able to protect that content in transit and at rest, but also make it frictionless. And I think this is another area that you're leading the charge on in terms of how can we make encryption more frictionless. And I know one of the initiatives that you're working very closely on is around that identity piece as well. To what additional pieces of identity can we leverage to make accessing encrypted content easy? Can you talk through that a little bit?
Yes. With one of the things that was very critical in our information security strategy was to reassess how we were doing security. The legacy security model created the walls where we all existed in the walls, right? And we were protected by the walls. Well, what COVID demonstrated to us, it was that the walls are over there and you are over here. You're at home and there's no firewall sitting at your house that is protecting you with unified threat management systems. So it came down to the identity. It came down to how do we get our systems to our users effectively while validating who they are, what assets they are on. The whole model of zero trust was something that we were trying to drive even before it became a hot topic. Or the SASE model from Gartner, we were already trying to deliver applications rather than a network. So for the state of Delaware, it's a tough journey, right? It's a journey that goes through funding requirements, goes through design requirements, goes through resource requirements. But to be in the path to achieving that zero trust model with a foundation a strong foundation on identity. So now the more I know about you, the more intelligence I can offer you. The more I can tell you, well, this particular identity you're trying to send a mail to is outside your organization. Is that the source you want to go to? Or they might be a third party that already has a relationship with your organization through some type of identity trust. Then I don't have to alert you because you're the State Department sending something to the federal government that we have a trust with. So the ability to know your employees, the ability to be able to provide a customized experience for them gives them better security with less friction.
You know what? I love that comment about the walls, the virtual walls, if you like, have gone. And we talk about this a lot. And I know that's why we partner so closely with yourself and Dan around. I think the traditional model is protecting the network layer and of course the application layer. And I think what I know something that all three of us believe passionately about is the world's moved on and it's now about protecting the human layer. And I think it's exactly as you said, Solomon, it's about wrapping tools around our people because they are now the perimeter within your organization, and that's what you need to kind of protect. I'm going to switch gears then, because you also mentioned right at the beginning something really that struck a chord with me, and I want to come back to it. You also mentioned, as well as email security, as a direct impact of remote working, and that's part of that ability for certainly listeners on the line to try and look at whether funding can be available to try and deliver on some of these cybersecurity projects. One of the other things you mentioned, as well as email, is one, but the collection of data is another direct impact of the pandemic. You mentioned a couple of examples there. You mentioned COVID results being transferred from the supply chain of the state of Delaware to Delaware. And you also mentioned something I was fascinated to dig into, which is also the absentee ballot. Now, I know this is something we've both done a lot of work on together. We were fascinated when we originally talked about this because maybe traditionally the election commission was kind of expected somewhere between 5 and 10% of the absentee ballot. Whereas now with COVID, because of isolation and because of the inability to travel, that absentee ballot request now is in your own words, 10 and actually probably 20 times the amount. I'm fascinated to learn a little bit more about that, about how that's changed the fundamental underlying security model around the need for citizens to be able to do what is their right and vote. And yet now the pressures on Delaware to be able to do that digitally, do that securely, you know, in a world that we just hadn't seen coming. Talk us through that collection of data now as a key project within Delaware.
Yeah, it's one that you almost did not necessarily plan for. When you have a very limited audience of use cases, you usually work on that based on time and opportunity. We focused the last 2 to 3 years to creating a formidable election environment. We built entire isolated networks. We built entire monitoring systems. We got new voting machines. We got new tally systems. We can know in an instant whether you voted in the end of the state or another area within our state within seconds by just scanning your driver's license. We put all this infrastructure in place and our citizens couldn't get there when the pandemic hit. There were, you know, from just our citizens of disability, our citizens that were overseas that couldn't get back, our citizens that just were sick and couldn't get to the polls. So we had to rapidly adapt. And one of the things that I take a great pride in is the partnership between our Elections Commission and the Department of Technology and Information, that we have a common goal to enable this critical service to happen. And we've leveraged that relationship quite a bit. We have partnerships with our federal partners, our National Guard, our physical security teams, and we get together and we do the life of a ballot, both in a physical sense and now in the electronic sense, to find ways to provide that level of attestation for our citizens. It's an extensive work in progress, and it's work that is still going on for us to evolve to a way that we have that frictionless ability to submit a ballot for a citizen and provide additional attestation. Is not only good enough just to send the file, but how do you validate to them that the data they sent was what they really wanted to send or what they really selected? That end-to-end is what we're driving to achieve in the state of Delaware.
You know, that's going to be so interesting as one of many, many use cases of, again, how you can apply for funding to be able to ultimately digitize a physical process into now a digital process. And again, you mentioned a fascinating one. Again, every state that we're watching this video will have requirements for test results to be able to deliver. There's just another use case of information to be shared. And again, just to round this section out, I also loved what you said about that user experience, whether it's email or whether it's files. User experience is ultimately always been the Achilles heel of security, right, Solomon? Traditionally, the ability to let's do something securely, but not and let's be able to validate that it's an approved process, but without too much friction, and especially when you're engaging in a whole variety of different IT technology capabilities, it makes it such a challenge. And I know that's something that you feel deeply passionate about. It can't just be secure. It has to also be frictionless, right?
It has to be. If you set a 20-character password, I would tell my team is you might think you're successful because you turned that policy on, but you should look under your keyboard. It'll be written right there. Or look for that notepad on the desktop that says passwords, because now it's 20 characters. Our goal, even through our identity program, was to make everything frictionless, including how to do multi-factor authentication. Because it's not about just prompting them every time for multi-factor authentication. It's about risk, about the risk of the asset, risk of the location, risk of the human being, and risk of the system that you're accessing that we validate to that extent. When it came to the data transfer, our historic or legacy processes is we will create a tunnel between us and the third party. We will do a secure file transfer. We'll do things like mutual authentication of each source. We would encrypt the data before we create the data winner. When we transfer data as a state, we have an entire process. But now you're transferring the data to somebody that you just created a relationship yesterday and now needs that data for this research, or have to get it to one of our pharmacy organizations to provide COVID services. So when the process of data transfer is so dynamic, you need a solution that can support that. You need a solution that can enable you to be able to say, here's the email, just double click it. You might have to put in your first name, your last name, your address to validate that it's you. And then you have that data, and you have that data in a secure format. And not only do you have that data in a secure format, we know when you picked it up. We know who picked it up. That level of visibility through that distribution pipeline without the extensive legacy process was very important for us. And we're very excited to be able to support the business through that.
So you know what, Solomon, before I hand back to Dan, and maybe Dan could give us his tips on how organizations could try and access some of this funding, I think it would be a lost opportunity not to get your final advice for those listening to say, you have delivered and are delivering so much innovation across Delaware, innovation across email security to try and avoid human error, which we know is a big risk, innovation around sharing files through a whole different variety of use cases, whether it be absentee ballots or test results. What advice would you give those on the line about how you can drive innovation through the lens of it's a changed world to try and access some of this funding to be able to do some of the things that you have done and are doing in Delaware?
I think the funding conversation is very critical. It takes us for state government 2.5 years to make a right turn, right? To get the RFI, to justify the spend, to go through the legislatures, to go through the Office of Management and Budget, to get the funding, and to, by the time you've actually ready to execute, the threat already manifested or passed. And that is the challenge with cybersecurity. What we've found and what we've decided to do is explore all options, partner with our agency partners for their grants, because each project comes with its security element. And a lot of times when our agency partners go for funding, they go by themselves. They said, I just need the unemployment insurance application. But there's a lot that goes to that. There's the authentication of that application. There's identity proofing of the users. There's login. There's visibility. There's threat alerts. All of that have to be baked into that package when you go to look for your funding and to explore other partnerships with the federal government for funding. It's so important for us to look for, if we have to rely on our state budgets, it's quite difficult during this time when the revenue is low and there's overall challenges everywhere to achieve our goals. But our federal partners see our critical value and the ability to sustain a government through this time and are offering us some assistance. And we have to go to them with actionable information, with actionable projects and solutions that they see the value to the citizens. And I am sure they will support us.
Solomon, it's great advice, fantastic insight, and thank you so much for sharing that deep level of analysis of what it's really like, all the challenges of working as a CISO in state government. Thank you so much. Dan, if I may, I'm going to bring you back to kind of help guide us through the path of maybe some practical advice. Maybe you could talk us through your tips on applying funding to round us out.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Tony. That was a fantastic conversation. And I think what's really key for all the listeners is the practical justifications that Solomon was walking through. Great questions that Tony asked. But the big thing is when you get the right form and you get the right channel and you get the right application, if you will, with the right people, right place, right time, right project, with the right funding source, you got to have that great justification. I think Solomon did a great job of laying that out. There's some links. We're going to make these available to you. Hopefully, Nasio, we can get you these, these actual slides, so you can actually click on these links and just go right to them. But there's a wonderful list of resources that are available. So the first tip is really know your resources, do your federal homework. And I know there's a lot of grant offices in every state. There are offices in many of your agencies. If not, find out who that person is, because those are the people who have the expertise in applying for these grants. They know where to go. The Karazhak website has got amazing links, frequently asked questions. I'm not going to obviously walk through each of these links, but each of these is like an abundance, a wealth of really great knowledge. NCSL, Department of Education, you see that. National state legislatures, National Conference of State Legislatures, another great one, National League of Cities, National Governors Association, and of course NASIO, all have great guidance on specific different offerings, grants, tips, frequently asked questions. So these are all resources you should be researching along with those grant offices in your state. Tony, you can go on to the next slide. I'm going through these quickly, but again, I really encourage you. I mean, I know just reading through these slides again, living through this again over the last year with a lot of our partners, there's just so much knowledge and so much wealth of information you can go to here. You need to really be able to call a friend, get advice from state and local government colleagues who have success at getting CARES Act funding. One of the things we're hearing around the country is that some states have done fantastic. Some local governments, I'm hearing from a lot of different organizations that local governments are doing a great job of using really kind of one-time money to apply the technology that Tony and Solomon were talking about. Some of the states pretty well, some of the states not so much, haven't been able to write those justifications as Solomon was just talking about. So here's some articles of some grant purchases, some actual kind of case studies of people who've done it. You can go to those and you can visit those. But it's working with those authorities in your jurisdiction. I really encourage you to build those lasting relationships. Sometimes people say, well, I didn't get that pot of money. I didn't get that grant. But one thing I learned through my years in government, a lot of people I talked to today, even in the last 6 months, that these relationships and these pots are not a one-time static thing, that, they're replenished, if you will. And there's talk right now of actually adding more CARES Act funding. There's talk of more stimulus money. So you need to keep going back and keep looking at this. And these relationships that you have with these grant offices really can outlast any one pot of money that might be available from the feds, that you can really, if you will, go back to the well multiple times and encourage you to do that. And then the last thing is have a plan ready to go. We've learned that. I'm sure Solomon can attest to this as well. You never know. I mean, I've so many times in my experience in government where, no money, no money, no money. Hey, you got $1 million. You got to spend it by next Thursday. And it's kind of this, have your list ready to go, because if you've got a great case study, if you've got a great justification, if you've got a great project, as Solomon was describing and Tony was describing, if you've got those ready to go and you can show how this is related to working from home, how it's related to the pandemic, how it's related to these different technologies that are new and needed right now because of the pandemic, there's going to be additional opportunities to use those multiple times. So some examples. Granicus has got some things. There's a lot of really good articles there from New York, and then Macomb County here in Michigan, where I'm talking to you from today. Keep trying, persevere in those needs, because there are a variety of different pots. And if you've got a great story and you've got a great case study and justification, you're going to be able to find the money and make the case in your state and with the federal government. So, Tony, that's pretty much the tips. I really want to encourage people to visit those links. There's literally, you could spend hours just going through the background on some of these, but there's a lot of really great materials that actually point to other materials as well. So a ton of great content there. And I just want to emphasize again, thank you for this opportunity. I really want to highlight what Delaware is doing and what you're doing with them at Egress, Tony.
You know what, Dan and Solomon, I want to take this final opportunity to thank, first of all, Solomon and Dan. We really, really appreciate your insights. And of course, really want to thank NASCIO for the opportunity to present. And hopefully everyone on the line has got some value and some insights out of this panel discussion. Thanks again for all your time, guys.